أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. Okay, so inshallah we're going to be starting الأفعال المزيد فيه, derived forms from the فعل مجرد, and we're going to be talking about the different meanings of these verbs inshallah ta'ala. To begin, here we have a table. This is the mujarrad form, form 1, and then we have after this forms 2 to 10. And we also have some rare forms, but we're not going to be covering those rare forms because they're very rare and they're not used in the Quran. And we'll be covering later on also the rubai verbs that have 4 base letters. So we're going to go through each and every form from form 2 to form 10 in detail and to explain the different meanings associated with them. Now the information I'm using are from advanced books, so it's probably new information, and inshallah we'll use examples from the Quran as well, inshallah ta'ala. Now before we start the 10 forms, I just want to speak about a few things. First of all, whether a verb is transitive or intransitive, and how this plays a role in the different verb forms. So we're going to use 2 verbs, which are from the thulathi mujarrad. We have, let's divide this up, we have the verb karuma. Karuma Zaydun. Zayd was honorable, or was honored. That's a fi'l lazim, because the verb just affects the fa'il. There's no maf'ul bihi. Now when you have a lazim verb and you want to make it into a transitive verb, then one of these forms, from either form 2 to form 10, and there are some that won't be, or cannot be, while others can be, one of them will be transitive. In this case, it's form 4. And this is the most common. Most of the transitive verbs from an intransitive thulathi mujarrad will be from the wazn of af'ala, form 4. But not in every case. So we have akrama, Muhammadun Zaydan. So Muhammad honored Zayd. Now this is when the thulathi mujarrad form of the verb is intransitive. However, when it's transitive, and you want to make it intransitive, then there is usually a form from the mazid fihi, which will give you this intransitive meaning. So kasara Muhammadun az-zujaj, Muhammad broke the glass. In kasara az-zujaj, the glass broke. So this is on the pattern of in fa'ala, form 7. So in fa'ala, one of its meanings is for it to be the intransitive of the thulathi mujarrad. And you realize each verb is different. For example, the verb kataba. Kataba means to write something. So it has a fa'il and a maf'ul bihi, which means to write or to prescribe something. Now, there is no intransitive form for kataba, unlike kasara. And the reason why is because to break something can happen naturally. Maybe the wind blew it, or something happened, an earthquake happened, and it broke. But something cannot be written or be prescribed on its own. There has to be a prescriber or a writer. So in this case, there is no intransitive form. Now when I say intransitive, I mean when there is no fa'il. In fact, the maf'ul bihi becomes the fa'il. So notice how here, this is the maf'ul bihi, but here it becomes the fa'il, as if it's breaking itself. This is possible, but we can't say, for example, in kataba al-hukm. That'll be as if the law wrote itself, which is impossible. But you can use, for example, the majhul forms. Kutiba, kusira. That's okay. There is a fa'il, but the fa'il is not mentioned in these forms. But in this case, when we're talking about intransitive, we're talking about when the object becomes the subject. Let's continue on. Okay, here it says, not every root will have all 10 forms. In fact, there is no root that has all 10 forms. Some forms will be used, some will have more forms than other, but overall, there'll be an average of maybe 3 to 6 different forms that are used. Second point is whether the meanings associated with these forms are sama'i or qiyasi. When we taught these forms at a basic level, we might get the impression that it's qiyasi. Af'ala is used for transitiveness, fa'ala is used for mubalagha, for hyperbole, istaf'ala is used for seeking something. However, But however, when you get into detail and you actually see the meanings associated with the different forms, you'll realize that there is quite a bit of information that we're presenting that will be sama'i, based on the way it was heard from the Arabs. Just an example of this. So here we have forms 2 to 10. Now, we're taught this form here, form 4, is used for transitiveness, to make a verb transitive. This, for example, is used to indicate hyperbole. So you're emphasizing the action. It's multiplied many times or done with intensity. However, sometimes that meaning of intensity is actually represented by af'ala. Sometimes it's represented by istaf'ala. Fa'ala would be most commonly used for intensity and repetitiveness, but there are other forms used for that as well. Another example is af'ala. Af'ala could actually be the opposite meaning of the thulathi mujarrad. That occurs in some base letters. Another example, here we have two verbs, qala and aqala. Qala means to say, but aqala doesn't mean to make somebody say. It actually means to prevent or to nullify. And in fact, it's used predominantly in business transactions. Now, this meaning for the verb aqala was not expected. Now, this verb has been used in the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So the hadith is, قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم من أقال مسلما. In here there's actually a missing word that's assumed to be there. It's a maf'ul bihi. It's من أقال مسلما بيعا. So he who agrees to cancel a transaction of a Muslim, أقاله الله عثرته يوم القيامة. So whoever does this, Allah will nullify or prevent, or in this case forgive, his mistakes or his sins on the day of resurrection. Or more precisely, the day of standing in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now there's a variation of this hadith that says, Man aqala akhahu, his brother. And akha could actually refer to non-Muslims as well. So it's to anybody. And this is something in the Quran we're taught to deal justly and in the best manner to all people. The point though is, this is talking about when there has been agreement on a transaction and then the person changes his mind. Now you could say, it's too bad. We've done the transaction and you agree to it. But what is better and what will make Allah forgive you is to cancel the transaction and say, it's okay. Give me back what you bought from me and I'll return your money back. And Allah will forgive somebody who does this. But notice here, the verb aqala was used. And the verb aqala in the first instance here is different from this aqala. This refers to nullifying or cancelling a transaction, and this refers to nullifying and cancelling one's mistakes. So this meaning is sama'i. However, we have the verb qawala, which means to discuss or to make a transaction. Now this pattern, fa'ala, is used for al-musharaka, when you engage in a mutual action between two or more people. So qawala is the act of speaking or talking with each other. So this verb actually means to discuss, or it can be used more specifically to mean to make a transaction. And this is actually an expected meaning, because we know fa'ala has the meaning of al-musharaka. So this is just an introduction to the topic, and inshallah we'll go through each of the different forms inshallah in detail. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم والحمد لله رب العالمين. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. So inshallah we're going to be starting form 4, Bab If'al. So let's begin. I'm just going to go through a few things before we talk about the different meanings of this form. So 2 examples where we have the form 4 but not the form 1. The first verb is al-jama. So al-jama al-rajulu farasahu. So here we have the fa'il and we have the maf'ul bihi. So it's a muta'addi verb, but there is no form 1. The verb aljama actually means to restrain. It's used for when one restrains one's horse. So this means the man restrained his horse. And in fact, the thing put over the head of the horse to control the horse is called al-lijam. So it comes from the same base letters. Now, you might go to modern dictionaries and see that there is a thulathi mujarrad form, but this form actually is a modern usage. Next, we have another verb, ashamat as-sama'u. And what this means is, the sky rained. So it's an intransitive verb. Now, the way to look for these types of verbs is in the classical dictionaries. If you don't find a thulathi mujarrad form, then that's an indication that there is no form 1. Okay? Next. Now here we're going to talk about verbs where actually the form 1 has more emphasis in the verb than the form 4. So let's look at this. So this side we have the form 4. أبطأ الولد, and here أسرع الولد. So this means the boy slowed down or was slow, and this one is he was quick. And then we have the thulathi mujarrad form of the verbs بطأ and سرع. Once again, this is also intransitive. So both of these forms are intransitive. So this hamza does not give the meaning of transitiveness in these verbs. Now we'll find out actually there are verbs where the opposite exists. And we'll speak about this inshallah when we get to the meanings of this form. In that the af'ala form is more emphatic than the thulathi mujarrad. But in this case it's the opposite. So we're mentioning this before we talk about the meanings. So why is the thulathi mujarrad more emphatic? The reason why is because this verb form on the pattern of fa'ula is usually used with attributes. So fa'ula, you'll find most of the verbs on the bab of karuma, yakrumu, in this case bata'a, yabta'u, saru'a, yasra'u, hasuna, yahsunu, haruma, yahrumu, and so on. These actually refer to attributes inside one. So this is like saying that the boy was naturally slow. And this is like saying he was naturally quick. This, however, there's an indication that something is causing the boy to be slow. In this case, is causing the boy to be quick. So maybe the boy sensed some danger and then he sped up. So we say asra'a al-waladu. But for example, he could be naturally slow. But this, he's actually naturally fast. Okay? Now let's get to the first meaning of bab af'ala. And the main meaning, which is most common, is at-ta'diyah, transitiveness. So what this means is to make intransitive verbs from form 1 transitive. So example of this. So this is intransitive. We say jalastu, I sat. If I want to make it transitive, I'll put it on the pattern of af'ala and make it ajlastu al-walada. So this is maf'ul bihi, which means I seated the boy. Or it says to make transitive verbs of form 1 doubly transitive. So for example, dakhaltu al-bayt, I entered the house. Transitive to one object here. If we make it on the pattern of af'ala, we say adkhaltu zaydan al-bayt, which means I made Zayd enter the house. So it could have been either me, for example, forcing him, or more likely, I gave him permission to enter. Next. Okay, now we'll get straight to examples from the Quran, inshallah. Here. سَنُقْرِئُكَ فَلَا تَنْسَى. So this verb here is a mudara' verb from أقرأ يقرئ. And here it's نقرئ. It's the plural of majesty there. We will make you recite. So قرأ means to recite, and أقرأ means to make someone recite. And there's emphasis, the sin, he is used for emphasis. This is one of the miracles of Rasulullah ﷺ, where he never forgot the Quran. He recited the Quran for 23 years and never forgot it. This is a miracle in itself. The point though is, it's the form 4, and that's the meaning we expect. So aqra'a is the transitive form of qara'a. That's pretty straightforward. Okay? Next, this is actually Fir'aun talking. So he's got his people and gathered his people, and he's mentioning how great he is. One of the things he says is, أَمْ أَنَا خَيْرٌ مِّنْ هَذَا الَّذِي هُوَ مُهِينٌ وَلَا يَكَادُ يُبِينٌ. He's talking badly about Musa alayhi salam. And he called him someone muheen, somebody that's insignificant. And then one of the other things he says, وَلَا يَكَادُ يُبِينٌ. So yubin is a form for verb, which is abana yubinu, from bana. It's the transitive of bana. Bana means, for example, we could say, bana al-amr. The matter has become clear. We could say, for example, bana al-amru linnas, that the matter became clear to the people. So this is becoming apparent and clear by itself. Now in the ayah, it's talking about Musa Islam not being clear, by the words of Fir'aun of course, that he's not clear to everyone. So for example, if Fir'aun was speaking, what would be assumed would be lana. لا يكاد يبين لنا. So he hardly makes himself clear. We'll go by that translation inshallah. The point though is, this is the transitive form. So it's to make something clear. So what is he not making clear? It's his words, his message. Now, just regarding the speech of Musa alayhi salam, there are opinions where it mentions that Musa alayhi salam had an impediment in his speech. Now, we believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sends the best people, and this is in terms of the inward character as well as the outward. Now, if Allah sent the best person, it would be difficult to imagine that Musa alayhi salam had an impediment or a problem with his speech. Now, what scholars say about this is that what caused him to have difficulty in speaking was the time when he fled Egypt and went to Midian and spent 10 years over there. Okay? That's the expected form. We also have a more emphatic form, yubayyinu, which is the form 2. We'll talk about that later on. But with yubayyinu, there's more emphasis, more hyperbole. This is just talking about the words of Musa, and this is something that Fir'aun is criticizing. But when it talks about the signs of Allah, yubayyinu Allahu ayatihi, yubayyinu, there's more emphasis there. Okay? Next. Okay, this is in Surah An-Najm, and it mentions a number of transitive verbs on the pattern of af'ala. These ones are together, this ayah and this ayah, and then a few ayahs later, we have this ayah here. So I'll put them together. So it says here, وَأَنَّهُ هُوَ أَضْحَكَ وَأَبْكَى. So this means to make one laugh and to make one cry. That he's the one that does this. And amata, to make somebody die. وَأَحْيَا, to make somebody alive or give life to somebody. And here, وَأَنَّهُ هُوَ أَغْنَى وَأَقْنَى. He who makes somebody sufficient, free of any need, وَأَقْنَى, and he gives somebody contentment. And the reason why I mention both of these, because being wealthy and being well off and not needing others, it doesn't make you content. It's only with Allah. And all these things have been emphasized with anna. And the reason why is because people ascribe these things to other than Allah. And here is restriction. Annahu huwa. There's dhamir al-fasl to indicate this. That it's Allah and no one else that does this. Okay. Next example. This is an interesting one. First of all, let's look at this verb. We have here waqada an-naru. Waqada means to light up or to be ignited. So the fire lit up. This is an intransitive verb. Now, in this ayah here, in Surah An-Nur, we have the transitive form of this verb on the pattern of af'ala being used. When it talks about the example of Allah's light. And it says here, كَأَنَّهَا كَوْكَبٌ دُرِّيٌّ يُوقَدُ مِنْ شَجَرَةٍ مُبَارَكَةٍ زَيْتُونَ. So it is as if it was a white star lit from oil of a blessed olive tree. So here the word to be lit up. What lights it up? It's the oil, which is the zayt of the tree. The point though is it's talking about it lighting up. So the oil lights up this misbah, the lamp mentioned here. So وَقَدَ النَّارُ, we could say for example, أَوْقَدَ مُحَمَّدٌ النَّارَ. Muhammad lit up the fire. Now the interesting thing about this particular three-letter root is we have another verb which means almost the same thing. So أوقد يوقد has a very similar meaning to the verb استوقد. So who's the one that started the fire? The huwa in استوقد, which refers to الذي. That's the fa'il, مفعول به. أوقد, we could have said الذي أوقد نارا, but the Quran is very precise in its word usage. Actually, أوقد, the form 4, it actually means it immediately lit up. For example, when we have a lamp and you bring a flame to it, it starts up immediately. Now, استوقد actually also means to light up, but there's a process that needs to occur. In other words, you need to get the firewood to find the right place. Make sure everything is dry, bring leaves with it, and so on until you light it up. So there's a process there. It doesn't happen immediately. So the question is, why was this form used? When here it's bringing an example of the munafiqun. It says, مَثَلُهُمْ كَمَثَلِ الَّذِي اسْتَوْقَدَ نَارًا. It says their example is the one who kindled a fire. The fire was lit up, Allah took away the light. Notice here, he didn't say take away the fire. He took away the light, but he left the fire. Now, the final example in the Quran, here we have this verb here. وَثَمُودَ الَّذِينَ جَابُوا الصَّخْرَ بِالْوَادِ. And with Thamud, who carved out rocks. So here, jabu means to carve or to dig through. Here it's rocks, it could be through anything. But you're going through something. That's what jaba means. So it's not something that happens with ease. So it actually means to go through something. Now the form 4 is the following. Ujibu. So ajaba, ujibu means to respond to a call. Now we also have another verb to mean to respond. فَاسْتَجَبْنَا لَهُ وَنَجَّيْنَاهُ مِنَ الْغَمِّ. So we responded to him and saved him from the distress. فَاسْتَجَبْنَا, the form 10. Yeah. And the form 4. Both mean to respond. What's the difference? It's similar to the previous example. Ujibu actually is a quicker response and could be immediately, while istijaba yastajibu and actually indicates a time frame, a time period for the respond to happen. It didn't happen immediately. It took longer than the form 4. And even in the form, istaf'ala, af'ala. Notice the two forms. Istaf'ala is longer than af'ala. Now, a possible actually explanation of how we get jaba, the form 1, or the thulathi mujarrad, and how we get this meaning for the form 4, by adding the hamza. We said that jaba means to dig or travel through something. Now this takes effort. And when you make it transitive, what you're doing is, there's a job that's difficult. And you're asking somebody to do it for you. And that's how scholars say, this meaning comes out from jaba. So that's the first meaning of af'ala. There's a second part to this, with all the other meanings of bab af'ala, inshallah ta'ala. Okay, wa sallallahu sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam, walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. Okay, so inshallah we're going to talk about further meanings for bab if'al, the form 4 verb. So one of the meanings is, here it says, يجيء بمعنى الثلاثي المجرد. It comes with the same meaning as form 1. And this occurs with some verbs. Example of this, is the following verb. Now, this verb actually occurs on two babs in the Thulathi Mujarrad. Bab Nasara and Bab Sami'a. So we have Hazana Yahzunu and Hazina Yahzanu. So this one here, Hazana Yahzunu, is a transitive verb, and Hazina Yahzanu is intransitive. So the first verb means to make somebody sad, and the other meaning means to be sad. So this is like a state, while this is becoming sad by something or someone else. And both of these verb forms are actually used in the Quran. So the first one we have here in Surah Maryam. Here it says, Allah tahzani. Do not grieve or do not be sad. So if you look at here, the Ain Kalima, it has a fatha. It's a fi'l mudara' that has been negated with la an-nahi, so it's majzoom. But the point is, we have the Ain Kalima, which has a fatha. It's not this one here, but it's this verb here. Here has a fatha on the Ain Kalima. So here it just says, do not be sad. Okay? Now with the other example, the transitive form, we have لا يحزنهم الفزع الأكبر. They will not be grieved by the great terror. So here we have a maf'ul, and here we have the fa'il, al-faza'u al-akbar. So this is actually a transitive form. Now if we have this verb on the pattern of af'ala, this actually, ahzana, yuhzinu, is actually derived from this verb here. It means to make somebody sad. So it actually has a very similar meaning to this verb here. So what would be the difference between the two? They're almost the same meaning, but ahzana, the transitive form from this one here, actually means it's a transfer of fear. So you get the sense of a ta'diyah, which is the first meaning we covered, where the fear transfers from the fa'il to the maf'ul. While this verb here, hazana yahzunu, does not actually indicate a transfer. So that's just a subtle difference between the two. Next is we have a ta'rid. A ta'rid means presenting something. And this actually occurs in some transitive form 1 verbs. So if the mujarrad form is transitive, it's a possibility that bab af'ala would indicate this meaning. So let's look at some examples, inshallah. ذبح الكبش, which means that the male sheep or the ram was slaughtered. Now if you put ذبح on the pattern of af'ala, we get أذبح. أذبح does not mean to make somebody slaughter. It actually means عرضه للذبح, means that he presented the animal, the ram, for slaughter. So maybe he took it to the market for somebody to come and buy him in order to slaughter him. Okay, another example. Okay, so we have here the verb saqa and asqa. So the thulathi mujarrad and on the wazn of af'ala. The first one means to give water to drink. Say for example, saqa al-waladu al-kabsh. The boy gave the ram water. Now what is drunk, which is the second maf'ul bihi, is assumed to be water. But it could be something else. But obviously when it comes to animals, it's going to be water. Asqa, on the other hand, means to present water to drink, regardless if it was drunk. So, for example, in the Quran, we have here the first meaning, where Ibrahim a.s. says, وَالَّذِي هُوَ يُطْعِمُنِي وَيَسْقِينِ, and it is he who feeds me and gives me drink. So here there's an omission of a ya, so this is nun wiqaya, so yasqini, he gives me drink. So this is the mudara of this verb here. Now, we have another example where asqa is used instead, Here actually it's the mudari' majhul form. So here is the naib fa'il, waw al-jam'. And here, although the maf'ul bihi has been mentioned, it doesn't necessarily have to be mentioned. So for example, if you said saqa al-waladu al-kabsh, we know that he gave him water to drink. There's no need to mention al-ma'a. But in this example here, ka'san actually is what is being presented. This is here they are given to drink, or they are presented with cups to drink. Ka's actually is a vessel used specifically for wine, and it's filled. Just a final example here. Bi'tu sayyara, I sold the car. So this verb is from ba'a yubi'u, to sell. Aba'tu as-sayyara. This is on the pattern of af'ala. It means to present the car for sale. Now the next meaning. So we know that the form to, fa'ala, is usually used for hyperbole. But actually af'ala can also be used for this meaning. We have ثمرت الشجرة and أثمرت الشجرة. Both mean that the tree bore its fruit. So ثمرت الشجرة means the tree bore fruit, while أثمرت الشجرة, the tree bore fruit throughout. So in this case, أثمرت would have more hyperbole, meaning that the fruit filled the tree throughout, while ثمرت does not have that meaning. If it had some fruit, but there's still capacity to get more fruit later on, we could use ثمرت. But we only use أثمرت if it reached full potential. Example in the Quran of this, here it's talking about a number of different fruits. It says, انظروا, consider or look at. إلى ثمره, look at its fruits. إذا أثمر وينعي, look at its fruit when it here reaches full yield, maximum capacity of fruit, and when it ripens. Okay, next. Okay, next meaning, it's as-sayrura, so to become in a state. Sayrura is actually the masdar of the verb sara. The first one we'll cover, which is here, to become in the state of form 1, meaning the masdar of form 1. Example of this, hasada az-zara'a, meaning that he harvested the crop. It's a transitive verb. Now, ahsada actually means to reach the state of when it is supposed to be harvested. So in other words, the crop reached the state of being harvestable. Ahsada az-zara'u. In this case, he harvested the crop. It's transitive. The fa'al is huwa inside the verb. Here, ahsada actually is an intransitive verb. And the hamza here has the meaning to become in a state of being harvestable. So it's the masdar which the zar' has become or has reached. Another example, we have the verb jariba al-waladu, and here ajraba al-waladu. So jariba al-waladu means the boy had scabies. It's a skin condition, and ajraba actually means, here ajraba al-waladu means the boy became in a state of having jarab. So it's a very similar meaning. This means he had it. This means he became in a state of having it. So this actually has the meaning of transfer or to become. Notice in this example, the fa'il is the one that is becoming in the state of this verb. When we put the verb on the pattern of af'ala. This is the fa'il here, and it's the fa'il here. With the other example, with hasada, it was actually the maf'ul bihi, the zar' which transferred in state, and not the huwa in the verb hasada. Next, so that was the first meaning. Now I'm going to come to this meaning here. To become the possessor of a derived noun from form 1. Now this obviously is sama'i. Not every verb will have this, like most other of the meanings. So examples here. Ashhama, to become the possessor of shahm, to become the possessor of fat or lard. It's another way of saying he became fat. Next one is aysara, and from it we get the word yusr, ease. This actually means to be the possessor of ease, or for ease to be associated with him. So his life was easy. Okay, now this one here, atfalat, it actually means to be the possessor of a tifl. Tifl is a child. So atfalat, she had a child. So that's what it means by to become the possessor of a derived noun from form 1. And another point is that all these verbs indicate that this was a state that they were put into, when previously they were not in this state. So before this, atfalat, she had no children. And before ashhama, he was not fat. And before aysara, he was not the possessor of ease. Okay, we'll continue on inshallah in the next lesson, the other meanings of bab if'al, inshallah. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم والحمد لله رب العالمين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. So inshallah, we're going to go through the rest of the meanings of bab if'al. One of the meanings is as-salb, which means negation, of form 1, the thulathi mujarrad. So it's the removal of the action associated with form 1. Example of this, here we have the verb sarakha, the thulathi mujarrad, and this verb means to call out for help. And on the form af'ala, we get asrakha, which means to help one. In other words, it's the removal of distress. So it's to come to the aid of one who is calling, in other words. Asrakha. Now in the Quran, for example, now this is an event that will occur on Yawm al-Qiyamah, when Shaitan will address those people who followed him. Now, one of the things he says is, ما أنا بمصرخكم وما أنتم بمصرخي. So here he's negating completely, I am in no way whatsoever the one to remove distress from you, and nor are those people being addressed going to help Shaitan in any way either. Now the point is that the word musrikh is a ism fa'il on the pattern of asrakha yusrikhu, of bab if'al. Okay? Now another example of this meaning of as-salb, negation, is these two verbs here. Qasata and aqsata. Qasata, the thulathi mujarrad, means to oppress, similar to the word zalama. While aqsata actually means to act justly. It's actually the removal of oppression. So this hamza has the negative meaning of the thulathi mujarrad. Now, in the Quran we have the ism fa'il from both of these verbs. So we have, for example, وَأَمَّا الْقَاسِطُونَ فَكَانُوا لِجَهَنَّمَ حَطَبًا. But for the unjust, al-qasitun, they will be for hellfire firewood. Here's the ism fa'il of the thulathi mujarrad. We also have this part here, إِنَّ اللَّهَ يُحِبُّ الْمُقْسِطِينَ, which are the ones who act justly. This is from aqsata yuqsitu. Okay? Next meaning of bab if'al is الظَّنُّ وَالْإِعْتِقَادِ, which means assumption and belief. Two examples here. First one is أحمدت زيدا. Now the thulathi mujarrad hamida yahmadu means to praise. So for example I could say حمدت زيدا, I praised Zayd. When we say أحمدت زيدا, the pattern of أفعل, in this case what I am saying is that I am assuming or believing that Zayd is worthy of praise, that he is Mahmud. So I considered Zayd to be praiseworthy. This could be based on assumption, what I thought, or it could be based on something that I saw in front of me that made me think that he was worthy of praise. Next one is أبخلت زيدا, which means I considered Zayd to be miserly, or I believed it, or I assumed it, whatever it is. So the different levels of assumption, it could be with no evidence, with some evidence, or with a lot of evidence. And notice, first of all, is the thulathi mujarrad of both of these. One of them is muta'addi, and one of them is lazim. For example, bakhila Zaydun, Zayd was miserly. We could say, hamida Muhammadun Zaydan. Muhammad praised Zayd. Now, in the thulathi of this verb, bakhila Zaydun, Zayd is the fa'il. The thulathi of this, Zayd would be the maf'ul bihi. Just notice the difference there. Another example of this is أذممت زيدا. I considered Zayd to be blameworthy. Now, next meaning, it's دخول الوقت, the entering of a time. So, for example, here we have three verbs. أحصد, we covered this verb. One other meaning for أحصد is to enter the time of harvesting. If I said أحصد الزرع, the crop entered the time of harvesting. So it was ready to be harvested. And that's similar to the other meaning we covered in the previous lesson, of reaching a state. So they're quite related, those meanings. And we have also أصبح أمسى, which mean to enter the time of morning, الصبح, and here to enter the time of المساء, the evening. With this meaning, these verbs are tam. They're complete verbs. They're not naqas. Like, for example, the akhawat kana. For example, we could say أصبح زيد مريضا. Zayd became sick. This usage is the deficient verb, من أفعال الناقصة, which is from akhawat kana. But what we're talking about is that it's actually tam. So in other words, it's complete by the fa'il. We say أصبح Muhammad. Muhammad entered the time of morning. An example in the Quran is فَسُبْحَانَ اللَّهِ حِينَ تُمْسُونَ وَحِينَ تُصْبِحُونَ. So this verb here is from أمسى, يمسي, and this is from أصبح يصبح. So they're on bab if'al, and they mean to reach the time of evening and morning. Now the final meaning we're going to cover is al-mutawa'a. Now this word will come across in other forms. Now we talked about al-mutawa'a in the introductory lesson, when we talked about the example of kasaratul zujaj and inkasaratul zujaj. Now in English it's called the reflexive, and when it comes to bab if'al, it is the reflexive of form 2. Now let's first of all explain what al-mutawa'a is. It literally means to conform and obey. So what do I mean by that? Let's look at an example of this. So this is the form 2, and that's the form 4 that we're talking about. So the form 2 is muta'addi. It says فَطَّرْتُ زَيْدًا, which means I gave Zayd something to break his fast with. Now, when we talk about a mutawa'a, it's when the maf'ul bihi does the action or conforms to the action without the need of the fa'il. So the fa'il is taken out of the picture. So here the fa'il is taken out. And here we get أفطر زيد. Zayd becomes the fa'il. And so this means Zayd broke his fast. Now, there is a difference between al-mutawa'a and al-fi'l al-mabni lil-majhul, the passive verb. And I spoke briefly about this in the introductory lesson, because in the majhul form, the fa'il is not mentioned, but there is an assumption that there is a fa'il. When we talk about al-mutawa'a, this form does not contain the fa'il. Now, there are subtle meanings when it comes to the usage of the Arabs. Notice here, when it talks about Zayd breaking his fast, af'ala is used. While we know that the form 2, there's mubalagha, and that's one of its main meanings, hyperbole. And this could indicate that when you invite somebody over to have a meal, that you put extra effort into it. So, فَطَّرْتُ زَيْدًا. There was effort involved, more so than if Zayd broke his fast. There's no need for emphasis there. That could be a subtle meaning involved with this usage. That completes the meanings for باب إفعال. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم والحمد لله رب العالمين.
قال محمد هو ابن مالك أحمد رب الله خير مالك مصليا على النبي المصطفى وآله المستكملين الشرفا وأستعين الله في ألف.
الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. Now, I'm going to speak about this section of the Quran, and specifically regarding the emphasis used in these ayat. The first ayat is speaking about the fact that we will die, and the second one is speaking about the fact that we will be resurrected. Now, we spoke about emphasis being used and the reasons. And one of the reasons is if one denies something and you're responding to it. Now, that's obviously not the only reason why emphasis can be used, but if you put that in the back of your mind, that it's used for denial, then a question is asked. Is there doubt about death? I mean, even disbelievers know that we will die. But the thing that they deny is resurrection. So if you notice here, the emphasis used in these ayat. The first ayah, ثُمَّ إِنَّكُمْ, so inna, بَعْدَ ذَلِكَ لَمَيِّتُونَ. That's also for emphasis as well. So here there's two particles of emphasis used for death. When it comes to resurrection, ثُمَّ إِنَّكُمْ, so inna, يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ تُبْعَثُونَ. Indeed, you, on the day of resurrection, will be resurrected. There's only one particle of emphasis. So a question is, if this is used for denial, we know that resurrection is what is denied. No one denies that we will die. So why was double emphasis used for this ayah, and just one particle of emphasis is used for this ayah? To understand this, let's look at firstly the context of how this was said. If we go back, let's go to the following, and this is actually where the transition takes place from ayah 11 to 12, and that's the wow here, which joins ayahs 1 to 11 to 12 and onwards. So in the beginning of the ayah, this is in Surah Al-Mu'minun, it's speaking about the believers and that they have attained success. قَدْ أَفْلَحَ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ. Then it mentions the qualities of the believers, that they are humble in their prayer, that they turn away from idle talk, and so on. In ayah 10, it says, أُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْوَارِثُونَ. They are the ones who are the inheritors. الَّذِينَ يَرِثُونَ الْفِرْدَوْسَ هُمْ فِيهَا خَالِدُونَ. They are the ones who will inherit Firdaus, and they will abide therein eternally. So this is a promise made for the believers. And that's the context that these two ayat come in. Now, if you look at ayah 12 and 13, it begins to describe the creation of man. وَلَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ مِنْ سُلَالَةٍ مِنْ طِينٍ. And certainly we create man from an extract of clay. And then it mentions the process of creation. So, ثُمَّ جَعَلْنَاهُ نُطْفَةً فِي قَرَارٍ مَكِينٍ. Then we come to this ayah here. ثُمَّ خَلَقْنَا النُّطْفَةَ عَلَقَةً فَخَلَقْنَا الْعَلَقَةَ مُغْدَةً, and so on. And then the stages of creation are continued in this ayah. And then at the end, it says, فَتَبَارَكَ اللَّهُ أَحْسَنُ الْخَالِقِينَ. So blessed is Allah, the best of creators. And then following this, you'll notice it speaks of the blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this actually was in the context of mentioning the blessings of our creation. And it was in the context of mentioning the believers. And if we actually look at the way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned creation, He started off by saying, وَلَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا. So here, there's the lam of emphasis, and there's a qad. This is also used for emphasis. So there's two particles of emphasis for the creation. And appropriately, we have two particles of emphasis for death, as the opposite of life. Now, to a believer, which of these are more important? Death or resurrection? It's actually death. The way we die will affect everything after. Death is what is important for the believer. And death actually is when a believer is relieved from the trials and tribulations of the dunya. So in the context of the believer and in the context of blessings, death is more worthy of being emphasized. And resurrection was not in the context of denial, and therefore it did not need to be emphasized as much as death did. Another point of this is that death here, it's لَمَيِّتُونَ. The ism was used here, while here the verb was used. Death is a state that one is in, and then all of a sudden, he will be resurrected. And this is why a verb was used for resurrection, and why the ism was used, or a sifa, for death. Now, a final point about this, we have in Surah Al-Hajj, it mentions the stages of creation, similar to Surah Al-Mu'minun. There are differences, but here the context is actually directed to those who deny resurrection, unlike Surah Al-Mu'minun. So here, يَا أَيُّهَا النَّاسُ إِن كُنْتُمْ فِي رَيْبٍ مِنَ الْبَعْثِ. O people, if you should be in doubt about the resurrection. So here, the mentioning of the stages of how we were created is done in the context of denial of resurrection. The response here, فَإِنَّا خَلَقْنَاكُمْ. So it's a jumla ismiyah. So the creation was mentioned more emphatically than in Surah Al-Mu'minun. وَلَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ. This is a jumla fi'liyah. Now, in the jumla fi'liyah, the spotlight is on the verb, on creation. While in Surah Al-Hajj, the spotlight was on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Inna, most certainly we. And this was appropriate because in Surah Al-Hajj, this was said in the response of doubt and denial. Now if we go back, the ayat that come after it, look at the emphasis. ذَلِكَ بِأَنَّ اللَّهَ. So anna is used for emphasis. بِأَنَّ اللَّهَ هُوَ الْحَقُّ وَأَنَّهُ يُحْيِي الْمَوْتَى وَأَنَّهُ عَلَى كُلِّ شَيْءٍ قَدِيرٌ وَأَنَّ السَّاعَةَ آتِيَةٌ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهَا وَأَنَّ اللَّهَ يَبْعَثُ مَنْ فِي الْقُبُورِ. So notice how much emphasis was there for those who deny resurrection. This emphasis was not mentioned in Surah Al-Mu'minun. Okay? وصلى الله سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم والحمد لله رب العالمين. Welcome to the Learn Quranic Arabic channel. We are a channel dedicated to the teaching and propagation of the Arabic language. We have been teaching Arabic since 2009 and have developed a comprehensive curriculum from the complete beginner to the advanced student. Inshallah, it's going to be a very interesting journey, and I hope that you can be a part of it. This channel is for anybody, no matter how much or little you know of Arabic. If you're interested in Arabic or the Quran, then please subscribe.